crash landing on the unknown. The starship Vanguard was a symbol of humanity's ingenuity, a vessel designed to explore the farthest reaches of space and foster alliances with alien civilizations. Captain Lila Carson, a seasoned astronaut with a reputation for decisive leadership, commanded the mission. Among her crew was Ryn Varok, an alien scientist from the planet Vesh, whose expertise in xenobiology made him an invaluable asset to the expedition. Despite their differences, they shared a common goal: to unlock the mysteries of the universe. Their journey had been smooth until an unforeseen meteor storm struck the Vanguard, overwhelming the ship's defenses. The alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to stabilize the vessel. Lila's voice cut through the chaos as she issued commands, her heart pounding. Ryn worked tirelessly at his station, his elongated fingers flying across the controls as he attempted to reroute power to the shields. The storm proved too powerful. The ship's systems failed, and the Vanguard was pulled into the gravitational field of a nearby planet. The descent was chaotic, metal groaned, systems sparked, and the crew braced for impact. Lila's last conscious thought before everything went black was a desperate hope that they could survive. When she awoke, the silence was deafening. Pain radiated through her body as she forced herself to sit up. The wreckage of the Vanguard lay scattered across a barren, rocky landscape. Smoke rose from twisted metal, and the acrid scent of burning components filled the air. Lila's heart sank as she realized the gravity of their situation. "Ryn," she called out, her voice hoarse. Panic gripped her as she stumbled through the debris, searching for any signs of life. Her eyes caught movement, and she turned to see Ryn emerging from the wreckage. His blue, iridescent skin was marred with cuts and bruises, but he was alive. "I am here," Ryn said, his voice steadied despite the evident pain. His large, reflective eyes scanned the area. "The others?" Lila shook her head, her throat tightening. The rest of the crew was nowhere to be found, and the reality of their isolation hit her like a blow. "We have to focus on survival," she said, her determination hardening. "Let's salvage what we can." Together, they began combing through the wreckage. Supplies were scarce, and the planet's harsh environment offered little promise of immediate salvation. Ryn's advanced knowledge proved invaluable as he identified materials and tools that could aid their efforts. Meanwhile, Lila's leadership and practical skills kept them focused and motivated. The initial hours were fraught with tension. Lila's assertive, action-oriented approach clashed with Ryn's meticulous, calculated demeanor. They exchanged terse words as they worked, their frustrations bubbling to the surface. Yet, beneath the friction, both recognized the necessity of cooperation. As night fell, the temperature plummeted. They constructed a rudimentary shelter from the remains of the Vanguard, huddling together for warmth. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken fears and uncertainties. Lila glanced at Ryn, her gaze softening. Despite his alien appearance, there was something undeniably human in the way he carried himself, calm, composed, and quietly determined. "We'll figure this out," she said, breaking the silence. "One step at a time." Ryn nodded, his expression unreadable. "Survival requires adaptability," he replied. "Together, we have a greater chance." As the cold night stretched on, Lila and Ryn began to grasp the enormity of their predicament. They were alone on an unknown planet, with no immediate means of escape or contact with civilization. Yet, in their shared struggle, a fragile sense of camaraderie began to form. When dawn broke, the planet revealed its stark beauty, a desolate expanse of jagged rocks and crimson skies. The challenges ahead were immense, but Lila and Ryn stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. Their journey of survival had only just begun. Strangers in a strange land. The morning light on Alpha 97 was unforgiving. The barren landscape stretched endlessly before them, a stark contrast to the lush, thriving worlds Lila had once known. The planet's surface was a maze of jagged rocks and sparse vegetation, with a reddish hue that painted everything in an eerie glow. It was beautiful in its own way, but Lila couldn't help but feel the weight of isolation. The Vanguard had crashed, and now it was just her and Ryn, stranded in an alien world. "We need to find water and food," Lila said as she surveyed the horizon. Her tone was calm, but the urgency was clear. "Without those, we're not going to last long here." Ryn, always the rational thinker, nodded. "I will search the southern perimeter," he suggested, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. "You take the northern sector." Lila hesitated. The idea of splitting up made her uneasy, but Ryn was right. Covering more ground was their best chance. They needed to find resources, quickly. "Okay," she agreed, though her voice was tinged with uncertainty. "But let's stay in contact. If anything happens, signal immediately." They parted ways, each heading in the direction they had agreed upon. The land around them was harsh, with rocky outcrops and sparse vegetation. There was little shelter to be found, and the wind whipped through the open terrain, carrying the scent of dust and metal. Lila pressed on, her eyes scanning the ground for any sign of life, anything that could help them survive. Hours passed as Lila trudged through the desolate landscape. Her stomach growled in protest, and the dryness in her throat made every step harder. She couldn't afford to stop, though. Every moment wasted meant they were closer to succumbing to the planet's hostile environment. Her mind raced as she pushed forward, her thoughts focused solely on survival. Just as fatigue began to take its toll, something caught her eye, a glint of sunlight reflecting off water. Lila's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? She quickened her pace, her legs aching as she climbed over a rocky ridge. The glint grew brighter as she drew closer, and finally, she reached the source, a small, trickling stream cutting through the rugged terrain. Lila knelt beside the stream, her hands trembling with relief. She filled her canteen, taking long, careful sips of the precious water. She had found something that could keep them alive. "Ryn," she called through her communicator, her voice laced with excitement. "I found water. Marking the coordinates now." There was a brief pause before Ryn's calm voice came through the comms. "Understood. I have not found food, but I will continue my search." Lila smiled to herself, feeling a small glimmer of hope. She marked the location and began her journey back to the wreckage of the Vanguard, where they had made camp. The water was a lifeline, and it was the first step toward their survival. When she returned to their shelter, Ryn was already there, sitting quietly as he studied the surrounding terrain. His expression was unreadable, but Lila could see the weariness in his posture. "I found water," Lila repeated, handing him her canteen. "It's a small victory, but it's something." Ryn took the canteen and took a long sip, his golden eyes flicking to Lila. "It is a good start. But we need more. We need food, and we need to find shelter." Lila nodded. The day was far from over, and the challenges they faced were just beginning. The planet was unforgiving, and they were running out of time. But for the first time since the crash, she felt a sense of hope. They weren't completely alone. They had each other. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape, Lila and Ryn sat together in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They had no idea what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain: they would face it together. Tomorrow, they would continue their search. But for now, the promise of water and the company of another being, someone who understood the gravity of their situation, was enough to keep them going. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Lila and Ryn had taken the first steps toward survival. And in a world where the odds were stacked against them, that was all they could ask for. The unlikely bond. Days turned into weeks on the desolate planet, and despite the grueling conditions, Lila and Ryn had settled into a survival routine. They were learning how to coexist in a world that seemed determined to push them to their limits. The constant pressure of surviving in an alien environment, far from everything they knew, had a way of stripping away the unnecessary. It was just them now, two beings from vastly different worlds, fighting side by side. Their early tensions had begun to fade as they found a rhythm. Lila's bold, action-driven leadership complemented Ryn's calm, calculated approach to problems. At first, their differences had created friction. Ryn's meticulousness was frustrating to Lila, who preferred to act quickly, but over time, she began to understand the value in his careful planning. Ryn, in turn, started to appreciate Lila's quick decisions, which had saved them countless times when every moment counted. One evening, as they sat near the fire they had built outside their shelter, Lila gazed up at the stars. The sky was vast and unfamiliar, a cold expanse of glittering lights that stretched far beyond their reach. It reminded her of the home she had left behind, the world she had once known. It was a constant ache in her chest. "Do you ever think about home?" Lila asked, her voice quiet, as though speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile peace that had settled over them. Ryn was quiet for a moment, his golden eyes reflecting the light of the fire. His alien features were sharp and otherworldly, yet there was something undeniably human about him in that moment, something she hadn't noticed before. He seemed as tired as she was, but he never complained. "Occasionally," he said, his voice soft, almost distant. "Draenor is a world of oceans and cliffs, vast and beautiful. Our cities are carved into the rock faces. We are a people of intellect and creativity, where art and science are one." Lila nodded, her curiosity piqued. "That sounds amazing." Ryn's eyes flickered with a rare spark of emotion. "It is. But there are things I do not miss. The constant pressure of expectations. The rigid structure. Here, I have freedom. The freedom to be, myself." Lila couldn't help but chuckle softly. "You're telling me that you prefer being stranded on a barren planet?" Ryn looked at her, his expression unreadable. "In some ways, yes. It is simpler. Survival is the only task at hand. No politics, no responsibilities. Just the challenge of existence." Lila smiled faintly, the weight of their situation momentarily forgotten. "I suppose I can understand that. Sometimes, all you need is a little distance from everything." She stared into the fire, her thoughts drifting to earth, the green forests, the vast oceans, the cities bustling with life. It felt like a lifetime ago. In some ways, it was. "I never thought I'd be here," Lila said, almost to herself. "On a distant planet, stranded. I always imagined my career would be about exploring the stars, making contact with new species, forging alliances. I never imagined it would be about surviving." Ryn shifted beside her, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Sometimes, survival is the greatest exploration. You learn more about yourself in these circumstances than any mission could ever teach you." Lila glanced at him, surprised by his insight. He was right. There was something raw about their situation, something that cut through all the superficialities of life. On this barren world, stripped of everything familiar, they had been forced to confront their deepest fears, their vulnerabilities. And in doing so, they had learned something unexpected, about each other, and about themselves. The silence stretched between them, but it was no longer awkward. It felt comfortable, as if they were both reflecting on their shared experience. They had come a long way since that first crash. They had learned to depend on each other in ways they hadn't anticipated. As they sat together, Lila realized something profound: despite their differences, they were not so different after all. Both of them had faced fear, loss, and uncertainty. Both had clung to the hope that they would find a way out of this, that they would survive. The fire crackled beside them, the only sound in the quiet night. And in that moment, Lila found herself wishing for more. More time, more chances to explore this strange new world with Ryn. To understand him better. To understand herself. "You know," Lila said, her voice almost hesitant, "we've been through a lot together. But we've never really talked about our worlds." Ryn raised an eyebrow, intrigued. I've told you about Draenor. What would you like to know about Earth? Lila thought for a moment. Tell me about the things you miss most. What's the one thing you wish you could have here, right now? Ryn didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out into the distance, his mind seemingly far away. The sea, he said at last, his voice almost wistful. The endless expanse of water. There is something about the ocean that brings peace to the soul. Lila smiled. I get that. The ocean is a place of serenity. I miss the sound of the waves crashing, the smell of salt in the air. Ryn nodded, his golden eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. One day, perhaps, you will see the oceans of Draenor. They are unlike anything you've ever known. Lila's heart skipped a beat. I'd like that, she said, her voice soft. I'd like that very much. In that moment, despite the hardships they faced, Lila felt a strange sense of peace. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were friends. Allies. And in a world that had stripped away everything else, that was enough to keep going. As the fire burned low and the stars above continued their silent dance, Lila knew that the future was still uncertain. But for the first time since the crash, she believed they could face it, together. A new life awaits. The days on Alpha 97 continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of survival. Lila and Ryn had adapted to the harshness of the planet, learning how to navigate its many challenges. They had gathered enough resources to sustain themselves, and their shelter, though rudimentary, was a safe haven from the constant threats of the world around them. But despite their progress, there was always an undercurrent of uncertainty, a lingering question in both of their minds: how long would they be stranded here? Would they ever leave? One evening, as they sat by the fire, the air heavy with the chill of the night, Lila found herself lost in thought once again. Her eyes traced the flickering flames as they danced in the fire pit, but her mind was elsewhere, on Earth, on the Vanguard, on everything they had lost. Ryn was unusually quiet that night, his golden eyes fixed on the horizon. He had grown quieter over the past few weeks, more reflective. Lila could sense that something was on his mind. Ryn, Lila asked softly, her voice breaking the silence, is something bothering you? Ryn's gaze shifted toward her, and for a moment, his expression seemed unreadable. Then, with a sigh, he leaned back against the rocky outcrop, his hands resting on his lap. I've been thinking, he began, his voice hesitant, about our connection. Lila frowned, confused. Connection? You mean how we've been working together to survive? Ryn nodded. Yes, but it's more than that. I've been studying your species, and I've come to realize something. Lila felt a knot form in her stomach. What are you getting at? Ryn met her gaze, his golden eyes searching her face. I believe, there is something about us, about our biology, that could create a unique bond. A bond that transcends mere survival. Lila's heart skipped a beat as she tried to process his words. What kind of bond are you talking about? Ryn hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. I've been studying the way our species interact. My people are known for their adaptability, and it's possible that there is a biological compatibility between us. A compatibility that could result in... Lila's breath caught in her throat. Wait, you mean? Ryn nodded, his expression serious. Yes. A hybrid child. It's possible. Lila's mind spun as she tried to make sense of what he was saying. Her initial shock gave way to a flood of emotions, confusion, fear, and something else she couldn't quite identify. How could this happen? How could something so profound emerge from this strange, desperate situation? We can't be serious, Lila muttered, shaking her head in disbelief. This is crazy. We're stranded on an alien planet. This isn't supposed to happen. Ryn's voice remained steady, though Lila could hear the underlying concern. I understand your hesitation. But it's not just the physical aspects that make this significant. This child, if it happens, would be the symbol of our unity. A new life, born from our shared struggle. Lila was silent for a long time, her mind racing. A hybrid child. She had come to terms with the fact that survival was the only thing that mattered now, but this was something completely different. She wasn't just dealing with the aftermath of a crash anymore. There was the possibility of creating a new life, a future that was beyond anything she could have imagined when she first landed on Alpha 97. But what does this mean? Lila asked quietly. What happens next? Ryn's golden eyes softened, his tone gentle. We will adapt. We always do. I know this is a lot to process, but we have time. We can figure this out together, just like we've done with everything else. Lila took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. This was uncharted territory. She had no idea how to navigate this new reality, but one thing was clear, she wasn't alone. Ryn had always been there, offering his strength, his knowledge, and his unwavering support. Perhaps, together, they could face this, too. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Lila said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. You don't have to be ready right away, Ryn replied. We take things one step at a time. Together. As Lila looked at him, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before, a warmth, a kindness that wasn't just about survival. There was something more here, something deeper. A connection that went beyond their initial differences, beyond the dire circumstances that had brought them together. The idea of having a child, a hybrid child, was overwhelming, but Lila couldn't deny the spark of hope that flickered within her. The child would be a symbol of life, of the strength they had found in each other. It was a future they could build, no matter how uncertain it seemed. As the fire crackled beside them, Lila and Ryn sat in quiet contemplation. The night seemed to stretch on forever, but in that stillness, Lila felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Building a future together. The days following their conversation were marked by a new sense of purpose. The discovery that Lila could carry a child, a hybrid between human and alien, had shifted the course of their lives on Alpha 97. What once seemed like an endless struggle for survival had now taken on a deeper significance. The child, a living symbol of their bond, became the focal point of their efforts to build something more than just a way to survive. They were now building a future. It wasn't easy. The planet was still unforgiving, the landscape harsh and relentless. But now, their survival was tied to something more than just finding food and water. It was about creating a life, one that would grow, thrive, and perhaps one day, escape the planet that had become their prison. Lila and Ryn continued their daily routine, but there was a subtle shift in their interactions. They began to work together with a shared goal, each step they took fueled by the knowledge that they were not just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for the life they were about to bring into the world. They spent their mornings collecting resources, exploring the surrounding terrain for any signs of more abundant food sources. Ryn's expertise in alien flora and fauna had already proven invaluable, allowing them to find edible plants and avoid the poisonous ones. Lila's strength and determination helped them navigate the roughest patches of the land, always pushing forward, never stopping. In the afternoons, they focused on reinforcing their shelter. What had begun as a makeshift home, a small protection from the elements, was now a more secure structure. They used materials salvaged from the wreckage of the Vanguard and natural resources from the planet to strengthen their shelter, making sure it would withstand the violent storms that often swept across the barren land. Each nail, each beam they added to the shelter felt like a small victory, a tangible step toward securing the future they both hoped for. Despite the work, the mood between them had lightened. They spent more time talking, not just about survival, but about everything. Lila would ask Ryn more about his home world, Draenor, and its magnificent oceans and towering cliffs. Ryn would listen attentively as Lila described Earth, the forests she missed, the oceans, the sounds of the cities, the familiar hum of life that had once been so taken for granted. The bond between them grew, not just out of necessity, but out of shared curiosity, understanding, and hope. One evening, as they sat around the fire, the warmth of the flames casting flickering shadows on their faces, Ryn turned to Lila with a thoughtful expression. "I have been thinking," he said, his voice steady but tinged with an unusual softness. "We need to ensure that the planet's resources are sustainable. For the child." Lila nodded, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. "We can't survive here forever. But if we're going to raise a child, we need to make sure it has what it needs. We need to be able to provide." Ryn's gaze softened, his golden eyes reflecting the flames. "There is an area, further north. I have seen signs of more fertile ground. It may hold more resources. It would be worth investigating." Lila felt a surge of hope. They hadn't explored that area yet. The thought that they could find even more food and water, something to help sustain them long-term, was promising. It was a chance to ensure their survival beyond mere existence. "Then let's go tomorrow," Lila said firmly, her voice filled with determination. "We need to make sure the child has a chance at a future. If we can find more resources, it will make everything else easier." The next day, they set out at first light, venturing into the uncharted territory that lay to the north. The journey was exhausting, but with each step, Lila felt a sense of anticipation growing. They were no longer just surviving. They were planning for something greater, something that could change everything. The terrain was rougher than they had expected, but Ryn's knowledge and Lila's persistence kept them moving forward. They encountered a few hostile creatures along the way, but they were prepared, their tools and makeshift weapons giving them the upper hand. The journey tested them in new ways, physically, mentally, and emotionally, but the thought of the child, of their future, kept them going. When they finally reached the northern area, they were greeted by a landscape unlike the rest of the planet. While the surrounding land had been barren and harsh, this area was lush with plant life, vines, trees, and strange, colorful flowers that seemed to promise a more abundant future. It was like a small oasis in the middle of a vast, desolate world. Ryn's eyes lit up as he recognized the potential of the land. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "This will provide what we need." Lila smiled, feeling a rush of relief and joy. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was the beginning of something new. They spent the next few days setting up a new base camp, marking the area for future use. They gathered seeds, took samples of plants, and created a sustainable plan for how to use the land without depleting it. Ryn's scientific expertise combined with Lila's practical leadership had them working in perfect harmony. It was clear that they were capable of creating a life here, a life for their child. As they sat together one evening, gazing out over the fertile land they had discovered, Lila couldn't help but feel a profound sense of peace. They had come so far. They had faced unimaginable challenges, but they had found each other, found hope, and found a future. Ryn turned to her, his golden eyes meeting hers. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "Together, we can build something that will last." Lila smiled, her heart full. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "Together, we will." And for the first time since the crash, she truly believed it. Together, they could face anything. The future was no longer uncertain, it was theirs to create. Trials and triumphs. As the weeks turned into months, life on Alpha 97 began to settle into a new rhythm. Lila and Ryn had created a routine that kept them busy with tasks necessary for their survival, but now, with the new area they had discovered and their shelter secure, their work began to shift toward long-term sustainability. The lush, fertile land to the north had opened up a world of possibilities: food, water, and resources in abundance. Still, they knew the planet would not offer them everything they needed. The planet had a way of testing them, challenging them in ways they hadn't anticipated. One morning, as Lila and Ryn ventured further into the newly discovered area to gather more supplies, dark clouds gathered ominously in the sky. It was the beginning of a storm, one that was swift and powerful, much like the other storms that frequently ravaged the planet. Lila felt the temperature drop suddenly, the air thick with the scent of moisture. The wind picked up, howling through the trees and shaking the branches. "We need to find shelter," Lila shouted over the growing roar of the wind, her voice barely audible against the storm's fury. Ryn, ever calm and collected, nodded, his golden eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "There is a cave nearby. We can take shelter there." Without a second thought, they turned and ran toward the cave Ryn had identified on their earlier expeditions. The storm picked up intensity, and the rain came down in torrents, soaking them within moments. They struggled against the fierce wind, but the storm was relentless. As they reached the mouth of the cave, they scrambled inside, breathless and soaked to the bone. The shelter provided little comfort, but it was better than nothing. For the next several hours, they sat huddled together in the cave, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind howled and thunder cracked, shaking the very ground beneath them. The storm was one of the most violent they had encountered, and both of them could feel the danger in the air. As they sat in the dim light, Ryn's voice broke the silence. "This planet, it does not give easily." Lila nodded, her mind racing. "We knew this planet would test us. But I have to admit, it's harder than I thought it would be." Ryn glanced over at her, his golden eyes reflecting the flickering light of their fire. "I understand. It is a harsh world, and its challenges are many. But we have overcome every test it has thrown at us." Lila thought about that. They had. Each day had brought a new challenge, a new test of their strength and ingenuity. Yet, with every trial, they had grown stronger, both as individuals and as partners. They had faced hunger, exhaustion, and fear, but they had also faced moments of joy, when they discovered the fertile land, when they strengthened their shelter, and when they shared stories of their worlds. Lila looked at Ryn, her thoughts shifting. She had come to depend on him in ways she hadn't expected. He had become more than a companion, he had become someone she trusted deeply. And, despite the differences between them, her humanity, his alien nature, they had found a shared purpose. That purpose was no longer just survival, it was something more. "I think about what comes next," Lila said quietly. "When the storm is over, we'll have to go back out there. Continue gathering resources. We still have so much to do before the child is born." Ryn nodded, his gaze softening. "It is not easy, but we will do what is necessary. Together." Lila smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. They had come so far. But as the storm raged on outside, she couldn't help but think of the future. A future that included a child, an innocent life that would need their protection, their love, and their strength. The storm subsided by the next morning, leaving the planet washed clean and eerily quiet. The air was crisp, and the ground was soaked, but there was a calmness that followed the storm. It was as though the planet itself had taken a moment to reset. After checking the safety of their shelter, Lila and Ryn headed back out to resume their task. There was no time to waste, especially with the growing anticipation of the child's arrival. As they traveled back to the fertile land, the sun rose higher, casting a golden light over the wet landscape. But their journey wasn't without its dangers. While collecting supplies, they came across a pack of indigenous creatures, a species of massive, predator-like beings with sharp teeth and strong limbs. The creatures eyed them from a distance, their movements quick and purposeful. Lila's heart raced as she realized the creatures were stalking them. "We need to get out of here," she whispered urgently. Ryn was already moving, his calculated mind assessing their best course of action. "Stay close," he instructed. "We will circle back to the shelter." They are territorial, but we can avoid them if we move quickly. They moved in tandem, carefully retracing their steps back toward the shelter, trying to avoid drawing attention. The predators followed them for a short distance, but Ryn's quick thinking and their careful movements kept them out of harm's way. The adrenaline rush was intense, but it was nothing they hadn't handled before. As they finally reached the safety of the shelter, their hearts were still pounding from the close call. Lila was breathing heavily, trying to calm herself down. Ryn, too, appeared on edge, but his composure never wavered. "That was too close," Lila said, her voice shaky. "I didn't think they would track us like that." "They are creatures of habit," Ryn replied. "They won't venture this far again. We need to be cautious, but we will not allow ourselves to be trapped here." Lila nodded, feeling the weight of his words. They were becoming accustomed to the dangers of Alpha 97, but they knew they could never let their guard down. There would always be more tests, more obstacles. The planet didn't make it easy, but it made them stronger. Together, they could face anything. That evening, as they sat by the fire once again, Lila reflected on their journey. She was exhausted, but a sense of accomplishment filled her. They had survived the storm, avoided danger, and continued their efforts to build a future. They were making progress. And more than that, they had made it this far not just as survivors, but as a team, united by purpose, by strength, and by the hope of what lay ahead. For the first time, Lila allowed herself to imagine what life would be like after the child's birth. A life full of challenges, yes, but also one full of possibilities. They had created a home on a strange planet, against all odds. And together, they would continue to build the future, step by step. A new beginning. The arrival of the child was something that Lila and Ryn had prepared for in ways they had never imagined. The months of survival, of gathering resources and building a future, had led them here, into a moment that would forever change everything. But as the days grew closer, Lila found herself filled with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. The reality of becoming a mother on an alien planet, far from the safety of her home world, was overwhelming at times. Yet, she knew that this was the next chapter of their journey, one they had embraced together, and it was a chapter she wouldn't face alone. The night before the child's birth, the air was calm, and the stars above were bright, their light seeming to reflect the hope that had slowly grown between them. Lila sat on the edge of their shelter, her hands resting on her swollen belly, feeling the gentle movements of the child inside her. It was a reminder that despite all the challenges, despite the uncertainty, life had found a way to thrive here on Alpha 97. This child would be a symbol of survival, a new beginning that held the promise of something better. Ryn sat beside her, as he had countless times before, his gaze steady and filled with the quiet assurance that had become his hallmark. He was no longer just an alien scientist to Lila, he had become a partner, a companion, someone she trusted with her life. They had come so far together, facing countless trials, and now they were about to face the greatest challenge yet, bringing a new life into this harsh world. "How do you feel?" Ryn asked, his voice low and tender, his golden eyes filled with concern. Lila smiled, her heart warm with the familiarity of his voice. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "But also hopeful. I never thought I'd be doing this in a place like this. But I believe this child will be a part of something bigger than us. A new future." Ryn nodded, his expression softening. "You are strong, Lila. You always have been. And this child will be strong, too. No matter what challenges await, they will have the strength of both of our worlds." Lila's eyes welled up with emotion, and she reached out to touch Ryn's hand. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to lean on him fully, feeling the depth of their connection. There was no one else she would rather have by her side in this moment. The hours that followed were filled with quiet anticipation. They had done everything they could to prepare for the child's arrival. Ryn's knowledge of alien biology and Lila's resourcefulness had allowed them to adapt to the unique circumstances of the planet. They had gathered everything they might need, and now, all they could do was wait. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, Lila felt the first pangs of labor. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, her body bracing for what was to come. Ryn was immediately by her side, his calm presence a reassuring anchor. He had been there through every trial they had faced, and now, he would be there for this new challenge, too. "It's time," Lila whispered, her voice trembling but filled with determination. Ryn's hand found hers, and he gave it a gentle squeeze. "I'm here. You are not alone, Lila. We will do this together." The hours that followed were grueling, filled with pain and exhaustion, but they were also filled with hope. Lila leaned on Ryn, trusting him to guide her through the process, as he had done with every other challenge. He was steady, offering words of encouragement, his presence a constant comfort. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the land, the child was born. It was a moment that neither of them would ever forget. The sound of the baby's first cry was music to their ears, a testament to their resilience, their hope, and the strength of the bond they had formed. The child was unlike either of them, yet they saw the best parts of both their worlds in its tiny face. There was no doubt, this child was their future. As Lila held the baby in her arms for the first time, tears of joy welled in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Ryn looked at the child, his golden eyes soft and filled with wonder. "We did," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is the beginning of something beautiful." And it was. The child, their child, was a symbol of everything they had fought for, of the strength of their survival, the depth of their bond, and the hope for a future that was now within their grasp. Lila and Ryn knew the challenges wouldn't end here. There would be more struggles, more obstacles to overcome. But in that moment, as they looked at their child together, they knew one thing for certain: they were no longer just survivors. They were a family. As the day turned to evening, the stars once again filled the sky above them. And for the first time, Lila allowed herself to imagine a future where she and Ryn raised their child on Alpha 97, building a life that was filled with love, hope, and the promise of a new beginning. Together, they would face whatever came next, united by the strength of their bond and the hope they had created in the face of adversity. And with that, the journey on Alpha 97 had come full circle. From a crash landing to the birth of a child, they had transformed their circumstances into something beyond survival. They had created a future, one where humanity and alien life could thrive, together.